I'm not sure what corner of the universe I fell into that day, but it was nothing like my old life. Before everything unraveled, I was a software engineer in Arizona. Clean house, 2 Labradors, and a wife I thought loved me enough to move mountains. Her name was Valerie. We'd been married for 9 years, and I thought we were solid. I mean, we had our occasional fights about the usual things: money, work, attention, but who doesn't? I never suspected the way she looked at her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. Or how she suddenly got really into late-night yoga classes and co-working sessions that didn't include me. But I was naive, too focused on work, and maybe too trusting. And that's how this whole thing started, with trust. The first time I had real doubts was 3 months ago. Valerie had gone to a friend's birthday party in a nearby city and didn't come back until noon the next day. I asked her where she stayed. She snapped at me, called me paranoid, and said I needed help. I dropped it. I always dropped it. I thought keeping the peace was more important than poking holes in our life. Then, one night, I got a weird message. A no-profile user on an anonymous forum sent me a link. No context, just, "You need to see this." Against better judgment, I clicked it. What popped up wasn't just a picture. It was a grainy night vision video feed, like something out of a tactical movie. I couldn't tell where it was, but the angle was high, almost as if taken from a building rooftop. In the dim glow, I saw my wife. And she wasn't alone. 3 men surrounded her outside a luxury hotel. She was laughing flirtatiously. One of them, a tall guy in a leather jacket, leaned in and kissed her. Right there. In public. The same mouth that kissed me every morning before work. My whole body went cold. I stared at the screen in silence for a good minute before I snapped the laptop shut. But the shaking didn't stop. My world had been rearranged in an instant, and I didn't know whether to throw up or scream. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I started tracking her phone. Quietly. Installed a keylogger on the shared tablet. I copied every bit of data I could without her knowing. Her messages were full of codes and nicknames, but one thing stood out: recurring references to someone named Stone. He was the ringleader. He wasn't just some fling. He was orchestrating everything. That's when I understood this wasn't an affair. It was a coordinated humiliation. And I wasn't going to let them win. But here's the thing no one tells you about betrayal: once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. You become something else, someone else. I used to be the guy who avoided conflict. Not anymore. Because the night I followed her to the old parking structure downtown, I didn't come alone. I brought my plan. And my plan had a sniper. To be clear, not a killer. Not a gun. But a camera. A professional-grade lens hidden in a birdwatching drone, capable of capturing every dirty detail from 6 stories high with sound. So when 3 men confronted me in that alley behind the building and their smug leader, Stone, laughed in my face, they thought I was outnumbered. But I wasn't. My sniper was already aimed. And what he recorded next changed everything. I didn't flinch when Stone stepped forward, even as the 2 other guys flanked me like they'd done this before. They were casual clothes, too casual for how tense the air felt. I could hear distant traffic, the hum of city life just a block away, but in that narrow alley, time felt frozen. The only thing moving was the tiny black drone hovering above them, silent as a ghost, its lens focused like a hunter's eye. That was my edge. They had muscle. I had truth. And the truth had wings. Stone had this crooked smile, like a man who believed himself untouchable. "So you're Valerie's husband," he said, voice low and mocking. "She told me you were a little soft." He gave a slight nod, and one of his guys chuckled behind me. "Didn't expect you to show up. Brave or stupid?" I looked him in the eyes and didn't say a word. Not yet. Because I wasn't there to fight. I was there to watch. To listen. And to record. He mistook my silence for fear. "You really should have stayed in your little fantasy," Stone went on. "Val's with a real man now. Someone who gives her everything she wants." I could have lunged. Could have shouted. Could have begged. But I'd done all of that with other people in my past, and it never changed the outcome. This time, I kept my hands in my pockets and let the silence settle until it turned uncomfortable for them. That's when he leaned in close. Too close. "You know, I was gonna let you walk away with your dignity. But since you came all this way," he paused, pulled out his phone, and tapped it a few times. "Might as well show you what she really thinks of you." I'll never forget what he showed me on that screen. A video. Valerie. Sitting in some luxury hotel room, curled up in bed, naked under the covers, smiling into the camera. Her voice was soft but deliberate. "He thinks I'm at a girls' retreat. Poor thing. He even packed me a travel snack." She laughed. "But Stone brings me real pleasure. Not spreadsheets and salad talk." The other 2 guys were snickering now, watching my face. And I smiled. It threw them off. Stone tilted his head. "What?" I pulled out my own phone and pressed a button. Funny thing about modern tech, I said. You never know who's watching who. Just then, the drone shifted slightly above us, zooming in as its recording light blinked red, feeding live footage straight to a private cloud. Not only did I have the entire conversation on audio and video, but the earlier hotel footage? I had already traced the location, extracted data from Valerie's hidden profiles, and synchronized it with timestamps from Stone's messages. Everything was cataloged, labeled, and ready for court. What the hell is that? One of the guys asked, finally noticing the drone. It's your confession, I replied calmly. Along with identity fraud, harassment, and a list of things your parole officer might not be happy to see. Stone's smirk faltered. You think you're smart, huh? I think I'm prepared. And I was. Because this wasn't just about catching Valerie in the act. This was about dismantling the whole show, every lie, every manipulation, every smug little moment they thought they'd gotten away with. And they were sloppy. They left trails. They underestimated the guy who didn't talk much, who didn't fight back, who just watched. What they didn't know yet was that this wasn't even my endgame. The footage wasn't for them. It was for someone else. And that someone else would be showing up very soon with questions none of them were ready for. I didn't walk away. I turned my back on them deliberately, knowing they wouldn't touch me. Not now. Not when they had that sinking feeling growing in their gut that maybe, just maybe, they had walked into a trap. Stone muttered something under his breath, but I didn't catch it. I was already halfway to my car, the drone trailing after me like a loyal witness. As I sat behind the wheel, I tapped into the feed and rewatched the footage. All of it was now stored in a secure drive, time-stamped, GPS-tagged, and watermarked with the one name none of them had heard yet but would soon learn to fear. Marcus Weller. He wasn't a lawyer. Not exactly. He was a forensic consultant, ex-military, ex-cybercrimes division, and very, very good at finding skeletons in digital closets. He didn't work cheap, but when I gave him the details, he said only 5 words before hanging up, "Send me everything you've got." He called me back 48 hours later with a tone I'd never heard from him before. A mix of curiosity and something close to disbelief. "You didn't tell me this was organized," he said. "This is bigger than some affair. These guys are running a racket. Targeted manipulation. Possibly financial entrapment. You ever hear of the term, love baiting?" I hadn't. He explained it to me like this: men like Stone operated in shadows, preying on lonely or emotionally vulnerable spouses. They'd swoop in, create illusions of romance or wild adventure, manipulate them into cheating, and then milk them for money. Sometimes they'd use the videos to blackmail. Sometimes they'd trick the partner into signing over assets. And in rare cases, like Valerie, they'd make the target think she was the mastermind, when in fact, she was just another marionette in their hands. "This guy Stone isn't just a scumbag," Marcus said. "He's a professional." I sat there in silence. For months I thought Valerie had been cheating because she was bored. Or cruel. Or reckless. But now I realized something worse: she might have thought she was in control, but she was being played too. And somehow that made the betrayal feel heavier. Not because it excused what she did, but because it meant she sold me out for a fantasy built on lies. Marcus didn't waste time. By the next morning, he had tracked 3 fake accounts back to Stone's IP history. One of them had been used to open credit cards that had Valerie's name tied to them. Another account had messaged 3 other women using almost identical scripts to what Valerie received in her early flirty messages. Copy-paste romance. A factory of emotional conjobs. And the worst part? One of those other women had committed suicide 2 years earlier after a sudden bankruptcy and divorce. Her name was Lena. Marcus found her photo buried in a group chat archive, laughing beside Stone, arm around his neck, same hotel as Valerie. Same setup. This wasn't cheating. This was a pattern. A business. And Valerie had been too caught up in the thrill to notice that she wasn't unique. Marcus gave me a choice: press charges, expose it all publicly, or use the information strategically. "If you want revenge," he said, "I can make that happen in court. If you want leverage, I can make sure Stone never touches another life again. But you have to decide, do you want to destroy them or leave them with nothing?" I stared at my screen for a long time before responding. Then I sent one sentence. "I want them to feel powerless like I did." And that's how the next phase began. A phase that would take us straight to Valerie's biggest regret. Because while she thought I was quietly licking my wounds somewhere, I was already orchestrating the downfall of the people who turned my life into a game. And the next move would take place not in the shadows, but in the one place none of them expected. A public hearing. When I first met Valerie, she was in PR, knew how to spin a story, how to charm a room, how to make anyone feel like they were the most important person on earth. It's what drew me to her. She had a magnetic presence, a kind of effortless confidence that made her stand out at any gathering. But somewhere along the line, that talent turned inward. She stopped using it to uplift people and started using it to manipulate, to twist narratives, to cover her tracks. She built this perfect version of herself, graceful wife, successful marketer, dedicated partner, and she guarded it with her life. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't trying to tear that image down for revenge. I was doing it because the truth deserved the same stage her lies had been performing on for years. The public hearing came faster than anyone expected. Marcus had fast-tracked the case through a quiet channel. It wasn't a criminal trial, not yet. It was a financial and reputational inquiry into fraudulent behavior connected to stolen identities and potential extortion through coordinated emotional manipulation. Stone was the key target, but Valerie's name appeared over a dozen times in relation to accounts, payments, and meetings. And she had no idea. The first she heard of it was when she was called to testify. I wasn't even in the room yet. She received a formal letter at her workplace, and her boss, who had once called me a boring man with no backbone, walked out of his office pale as paper after reading it over her shoulder. Apparently, several of the business retreats she claimed to attend were fraudulently billed to corporate accounts. She'd used company funds to pay for hotels, transportation, and in one instance, a spa day for someone listed under the name S. Blackwell. That was Stone's alias. Valerie's carefully curated life began to collapse in hours. Her work email was suspended. Her clients started pulling out. Her manager, who used to defend her blindly, placed her on leave pending investigation. She texted me that night, cold and clipped, "Are you behind this?" I didn't answer. The next morning, she showed up at my apartment. I could hear the panic in her knocks. I let her stand there. I watched from the kitchen window as she paced, looked around, checked her phone. I knew she thought she still had power, still had control over the situation. That somehow, if she got me alone, she could twist it back into something manageable. But I had already given Marcus everything. And now I was focused on something bigger than confrontation. I was focused on justice. A week later, I was called in to testify, not against her, but against Stone and his operation. Valerie was in the front row, pale, biting the inside of her cheek. She avoided looking at me. Maybe because she knew I wasn't there to explode. I wasn't bitter or broken or out for some movie scene vengeance. I was just steady. And when the footage started rolling, Valerie in the hotel room laughing at my expense, mocking the man who brought her soup when she was sick, it wasn't just strangers watching. Her parents were there. Her colleagues. Her friend Dana, who once told me I was lucky to have a queen like Val. The room didn't gasp. It went still. That was worse. The prosecutor asked me one question: "Did you suspect any of this before you received the anonymous tip?" I nodded. Not the scale of it. But I knew something was broken. And when someone shows you who they really are, you have two choices. Fix them, or free yourself. Valerie's head dropped. Outside, cameras waited. The case had caught quiet attention online. Not tabloids, not gossip, real interest. Because it wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the mechanics behind it. How easily people could be seduced not just by a lover, but by a narrative. Valerie hadn't just betrayed me. She'd surrendered her identity to a machine built to consume and discard. And now she had to live in the wreckage of what she'd chosen. But the most surprising thing? That was still ahead. Because I didn't just expose what happened. I found out why she did it. And once I learned the real reason, it changed everything. A week passed after the hearing and Valerie disappeared. Not legally, she was still in the system, still showing up in Marcus's investigation updates, but she went completely off the radar. No work, no phone activity, no movement on her credit cards. I thought maybe she was hiding, maybe she'd run off with Stone or whoever else she had lined up as her emotional crutch. But then Marcus called me again. His voice wasn't analytical like usual. It was personal. Urgent. "I found something," he said. "And it's not what we expected." I met him at a private office he used when handling sensitive clients. There were no windows. Just two laptops, a whiteboard, and a pot of coffee that smelled like it had been brewing since last century. Marcus didn't waste time. He opened a secure folder on his desktop and pulled up an old case file. On the screen was a photo of Valerie, but not the woman I knew. This was younger, maybe 18 or 19. She looked thinner, hollow in the face, eyes harder, like someone who'd learned too young how dangerous trust could be. Next to her photo was a man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, suit, polished. His name was Samuel Rayner. A high-ranking former employee of a financial firm that had been shut down for illegal debt collection and exploitation of vulnerable women under the guise of rehabilitation programs. And Valerie? She had been one of his clients. Marcus clicked to another screen. This is from 15 years ago. Valerie's name is buried in these reports, but it's her. Her records were sealed, probably a payoff involved, but I found encrypted audio from a whistleblower who recorded a conversation between Rayner and one of his associates. He played the audio. She's perfect, Rayner's voice said. Bright. Desperate for approval. You feed her the right lines and she'll convince herself she's choosing you. Get her loyal. Get her trained. Later, she can pull others in. There was a pause. Think she'll stay loyal? Another voice asked. She'll think she's in charge. That's all that matters. I sat back in my chair, the breath sucked out of me. Marcus looked at me carefully. Rayner was never charged. But he disappeared 6 years ago. Stone used to work under him. Different name, same methods. Valerie wasn't his partner. She was his product. That's when it clicked. Valerie had been groomed. She wasn't a woman who simply chose betrayal out of lust or boredom. She had been shaped by predators who knew how to exploit insecurity. She was a survivor pretending to be a queen. Everything she had, her confidence, her image, her entire sense of self, was built on foundations set by men like Rayner and Stone. She thought she was empowered. But she was still imprisoned. And I hated how much that made me feel something. Sympathy. Rage. Confusion. Because while her betrayal had gutted me, knowing she had never really been given a clean slate, that did something to my heart I didn't expect. Still, none of that changed what she'd done. She could have told me. She could have asked for help. But she'd weaponized her pain instead. That night, Marcus handed me one last folder. Inside were financial records, transcripts, and a small black USB. There's one more piece, he said. And this one isn't about Valerie. It's about you. I raised an eyebrow. Me? He nodded slowly. Someone's been trying to get close to you ever since the first thread about Valerie went live. Using fake names, burner accounts. She's been digging. Hard. But she's not working for Stone. He pushed the USB across the table. She's working for your father-in-law. I froze. My father-in-law had been quiet since the hearing. No contact. No public statements. He was a respected judge, retired, wealthy, connected. I had always assumed he just cut ties out of embarrassment. But now? I had a feeling Valerie's story wasn't the only one built on lies. And as I would soon discover, her betrayal wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the middle. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, just me and the blue glow of the laptop screen, replaying Marcus's words over and over. Her father. The same man who had shaken my hand the day I proposed. The man who gave that rehearsed smile at our wedding, paid for the open bar, and delivered a toast that sounded more like a warning than a blessing. The man who never really saw me as family, just some lower-tier tech guy from a middle-class background trying to climb into a family that dined with congressmen. And now Marcus was telling me that this man, Judge Malcolm St. James, had been watching me since the fallout began. Not in some passive, family-concerned way. He was monitoring me. Tracking. Digging. I plugged in the USB. There were files. Dozens of them. Screenshots of my social media. Screens of my work profiles, comments I'd made years ago on coding forums, even messages I'd sent privately through apps I didn't even remember using. Everything I'd ever done online had been collected and categorized. Notes in the margins like, uses passive conflict avoidance, responds emotionally to perceived betrayal, likely to forgive but withdraw. I wasn't just being watched. I had been profiled. There were documents too, ones I shouldn't have had access to. An old legal brief drafted the year before Valerie and I got married. It had both of our names on it. The title stopped my heart. Premarital Dual Benefit Agreement, Private Trust Management and Asset Reassignment. It was signed. By both of us. Dated 3 weeks before the wedding. But I had never signed that document. I knew my signature. I had been meticulous with every piece of paper before our marriage, especially after watching my buddy Jeff get burned in a prenup he didn't understand. So I asked for a clause for union. No prenup. No complications. Yet here it was my name perfectly forged. And Valerie's father's name as the witness. Marcus said quietly this was part of a larger shell trust. They used your name, your financial trajectory, your marriage to her, and projected how much money she could siphon legally over 10 years. The numbers were modest at first. But once you got promoted, everything changed. She started sending funds into joint accounts that quietly rerouted into holdings under dummy corporations. All created by your father-in-law's firm. I felt nauseous. You're saying I was married for profit? I'm saying you were chosen, he said. Everything, your job, your loyalty, your predictable nature, fit the mold. You were never a husband to them. You were an investment. I sat in that silence, heart pounding, lungs burning like I just sprinted a mile. And then something else struck me. Valerie never wanted kids. She'd always said it just wasn't the right time or she needed more stability. I used to believe her. But now I saw it for what it was. Pregnancy would complicate the asset distribution. If she fell in love with a child, she might start seeing me as more than a mart. They couldn't risk that. Everything. Every birthday gift. Every I love you. Every Sunday morning coffee. All of it performed. All of it, business. I drove to my lawyer's office the next morning. He was stunned by what I showed him. But he didn't hesitate. If we file this now, we can open a full investigation. She could face jail time. So could he. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to see Valerie one last time, not to scream at her. Not to get answers I already knew. I needed to look her in the eyes and ask the one question she would never expect. Did you ever love me, even for a minute? And when I finally got that meeting, I would get my answer. And it would break whatever pieces of me were still left. I waited 2 more days before I reached out. Not because I needed time to think. I had done enough thinking to last 10 lifetimes. I waited because I wanted to see what she would do next. Would she run? Would she send some carefully written email, blaming the past, painting herself as a victim, trying to claw back some piece of dignity? Would she lean on her father to bury the entire situation under a mountain of legal maneuvering? She didn't do any of that. Instead, she called. A blocked number, brief and quiet. Just 5 words. Meet me where we started. At first, I didn't know what she meant. Then I remembered. A tiny diner off the highway near Flagstaff, the place we stopped at during our first road trip as a couple. A nothing place, really cracked vinyl booths, yellowed menus, one of those flickering signs that hadn't been fixed in years. But we had laughed there. Genuinely. It was the first time I saw her really smile. Not the practiced kind. The real kind. I drove there that evening. She was already sitting inside, alone, in the booth by the window. She looked different. Smaller, somehow. Like someone had let the air out of her, and all that was left was a frame of what used to be strong. Her eyes were red. Her hair was pulled back tightly, like she was trying to contain herself in every way possible. She didn't speak right away. Neither did I. The silence stretched long and awkward, and yet I didn't rush to fill it. I wanted her to sit with the weight of everything. I know why you're here, she said finally. And I don't expect you to believe anything I say. But I still want to say it. I nodded slowly. Then say it. She looked down, then out the window, and for a second I thought she might just walk away. But then she turned back to me and said something I will never forget. My father told me to find someone stable. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Someone I could keep happy with just enough affection to keep him from seeing the rest of the picture. He didn't have to tell me why. I knew. He had plans. Accounts. Timelines. Scripts. But I picked you. You didn't pick me, I said, bitterness creeping in. He picked me. No, she said firmly. He gave me a list. I ignored it. I met you at that tech conference by accident. You remember? I wasn't supposed to be there that day. But I went. And I liked you. You weren't like the others. You didn't brag, you didn't chase. You just talked. You asked me about my favorite book and actually remembered the title. So what, Valerie? I snapped, finally letting something out. You picked me because I remembered your favorite novel? And that makes up for the years of betrayal? The fake contracts? The money siphoned out of our accounts? You forged my signature. You weaponized our marriage. You built a lie so deep I didn't even know I was drowning in it. Her face crumpled. For the first time, she looked like a person, not a mask. I know. And you're right. All of it. But you asked me something. She leaned forward, both hands on the table, eyes locked with mine. You asked if I ever loved you, even for a minute. And the truth is, yes, I did. Not just for a minute. For years. At first, I didn't know what real love looked like. I only knew how to manipulate affection, how to use charm to get what I needed. But you made me feel safe. Too safe. I blinked. What does that even mean? It means I started to feel like I didn't deserve it. Like at any moment you'd see the real me and walk away. And when Stone came back into the picture, offering excitement and power, I told myself I was just using him. That it wasn't serious. That I was still in control. But I wasn't. He was just another version of my father. And I fell back into the pattern. Because it was all I knew. I sat there stunned. For a second, I didn't know whether I wanted to scream at her or reach across the table and shake her awake. She wiped her face, voice trembling. I didn't come here to beg. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. There was a version of me that tried. Even if she failed. I stood up. Not in anger. Just in exhaustion. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, I said quietly. But I appreciate the truth. Even if it's years too late. And then I walked out. I didn't look back. Because for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't chasing closure. I already had it. The drive home was quiet. No music. No calls. No thoughts loud enough to echo. Just the hum of tires on pavement and the feeling that something enormous had ended. Not in a firestorm or courtroom brawl. Not with screaming or threats. It ended with a truth spoken across a chipped diner table. Soft, honest, and far too late. But in that quiet, I found something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the kind you pretend to have when people ask how you're doing. Real peace. The kind that settles into your chest like warm air after a long winter. Because finally, I had no more illusions to maintain. No more hope clinging to someone who never truly understood what she was holding in her hands. I wasn't walking away broken. I was walking away free. In the weeks that followed, things moved fast. Marcus filed the necessary complaints not for revenge, but for accountability. Valerie's father, Judge St. James, was investigated by federal authorities for falsified records and financial manipulation across multiple trust accounts. Valerie wasn't charged with a crime, but she was forced to return every cent she had filtered into those dummy corporations. Her professional licenses were suspended pending further review. And Stone disappeared before they could arrest him. But I didn't follow the fallout. I didn't obsess. I didn't celebrate her collapse. I simply rebuilt. I sold the house, not to erase the past, but because I didn't want to sleep another night under that roof filled with ghosts. I donated half the furniture, kept only what felt like mine, and moved into a place overlooking the edge of the desert. Quiet, clean, open. I started running again, not because I needed to escape, but because I finally had room to breathe. I took a sabbatical from work, traveled solo for a while, stayed off social media, and relearned how to be alone without feeling lonely. And one morning, sitting on a bench at the edge of the Grand Canyon, with a mug of bitter gas station coffee in my hands, I realized something. I had made it. I wasn't defined by what happened to me. I wasn't a victim of my marriage, or a casualty of someone else's damage. I was a man who walked through fire, looked betrayal in the face, and chose not to let it change who he was. Months later, I received a message. An email. No subject line. Just one sentence. I hope you're happy now. There was no name attached, but I knew who it was. And I smiled. Because I had my freedom. I had my clarity. And I had something else too. An unshakable understanding that I would never settle for half-truths again. That I would never let someone else dictate the terms of my worth. That I could love again one day not because I needed someone, but because I would choose them from a place of strength, not fear. This isn't a story about how I got revenge. This is a story about how I found myself, after losing everything I thought mattered. And in the end, that's the best kind of victory.